Hello, hi everybody. Great to be with you today. Great to have you with us. So obviously no Kamiji today. She's taking a little bit of time off. But you've got Pete still and me. Just to introduce you to me in case you don't know who I am. I'm Dave, part of Heaven and Healthcare team, and also part of sort of leadership team at Eastgate as well. So it's good to be with you, Pete.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Dave. We spend a lot of time doing this, don't we, on Zoom and other calls. Another part that Dave leads Eastgate Studios, which does all our media. So he and I spend a lot of time together on media stuff, don't we, Dave?
We do. But it's been a while since we did something like this, so it's fun to be back in this mode again. So I guess one of the things we wanted to do today is, I don't know, just ask some questions about what's going on and get your perspective on some things. And I guess one of the things that we're all absorbing right now and processing is there's been a whole load of announcements last night, well, end of yesterday. Lots of things opening up, cinemas, pubs, restaurants, model villages. I was personally very, very relieved that the model villages are opening up. So I'm sure you were as well.
Part of my life, model villages. So.
But obviously there's an impact on churches as well. What are you making of that at the moment?
Well, I was actually a little surprised yesterday, to be honest, that churches were included. I was very happy because I'd anticipated that we might be a bit further back in the queue for places of worship. So that was really good. And then, like I said, we actually had a meeting last night. Dave was in it with the Eastgate directors, and we're waiting for more detail on the guidelines of what that will mean for us in practice. Obviously, we're delighted that we can actually start to open Eastgate building up more fully. We have opened it up this week for private prayer. And it's quite interesting now because we're having to sort of do appointments to come to church because we need to keep track of people. And also because the capacity is limited, we can't just open it up and see who turns up if we get too many people and turn some away. So I never really had to think about so much appointments for going to church before. So, and obviously the whole social distancing, I think that's going to be a really interesting development. I think it's an absolutely necessary development for the nation as a whole, this social distancing going down to 1 meter. Otherwise, I don't think the economy can get running. But obviously it opens up a greater capacity reality for churches like ourselves. But it also comes with the idea that some people will be very comfortable with that because they're more at ease, and some people are still going to be quite afraid to come closer than 2 meters because of the risk. And so I think we're coming into that slightly more difficult scenario where we're having to do the risk analysis, where beforehand it was done for us. You can't do this, you've got to stay home. And it's now been, which is a good development, hopefully coming into sort of more personal and corporate responsibility, which is going to need a lot of wisdom.
And do you think, because obviously we've got this, what we understand at the moment is that when churches are going to be meeting together, that there isn't going to be, singing isn't going to be allowed, which is obviously a big thing. But at the same time, they're saying, obviously, you know, to some degree, this virus and this way of life is going to be with us for some time still in different, various, you know, capacities, I guess. How do you think we're going to transition out of that? Because we can't stay like that for, you know, a really long time. And because obviously that will be really damaging to church cultures, church communities, and then actual local communities. How do you think they'll transition out of it? Because it's not going to be that they will suddenly be able to announce, okay, guys, the droplets they're fine now. There's no problem. What do you think they're going to do? How we move into that next phase?
Again, I think it'll come back down to risk analysis. And all of life we do this basically a risk and benefit analysis. Medicine particularly is strong on that. It really is. So if somebody comes to me in the surgery and I think they've got something like a simple thing, tonsillitis. So that's very simple. Prescribe some antibiotics because I think it's a bacterial tonsillitis, but you know that carries a risk. You know, I'm going to treat the tonsillitis, but there is a risk from antibiotics. Some people are allergic to them and have severe reactions to it. So there is that risk, but the benefit outweighs the risk. The risk of serious damage from the tonsillitis, even risk to life, outweighs the risk of the antibiotics. So we're doing that all the time. So I think that will become, and what I think moving forward is that the focus will come off solely being on the coronavirus and the risk of that, but the risk of like the whole well-being of society. So singing is well known to be good for health. You think of that in old people's homes, residential care homes. The idea that they would have no singing in there. My dad's in one. He's got dementia, but when they sing, he's in a Christian home, and when they worship together, he comes alive. Do you see? And there's something about that. And Gareth Malone with all his choirs, that whole singing together is important. You've got productions, theatre. How about football crowds? People. So it's going to be interesting. So churches aren't the only ones who are going to have to negotiate this, but obviously for us, it's a massive part of that's what we want to do. We want to worship together, and we want to get back to that as soon as we possibly can.
And this is it's a really tricky thing for Christians to navigate, isn't it? I mean, obviously it's a tricky thing for everyone to navigate, but I guess if there's one thing that as a believer you feel like you are born and created to do, it's worship God and worship God together, and to feel like that voice is being taken away from me, that right that he's given me it's been taken away. Our voice have been silenced. I know some people are, they're reacting in various parts of the world to where similar things are in place, as seeing it as the state, the government is kind of attacking Christianity, things like that. I guess it's important. I don't want to comment on other countries, but I guess it's important for us to acknowledge that it's not just churches. The singing thing applies everywhere in the UK, and it's from a medical scientific perspective. So yes, you could say it is the enemy is trying to attack the church. Like you could say that, but from a human perspective, the government is actually basing it on medical guidelines, aren't they, and scientific guidelines.
Well, I think if you take the coronavirus as a whole, I believe it's a creation of evil. It's not God's creation, and it is designed. The devil designs to steal, destroy, kill. So if he can steal our worship, that's his number one activity. Broadly speaking, is to try and steal our worship away from God. This virus is part of a scheme towards that. It's a very effective scheme at the moment. I don't honestly believe that the government are against, faith groups. We're not the only ones who want to make noise, sound together in a worship side. That I've never been part of a sort of a mosque service, but I think they say things together. So I don't know how restricted they would be. So I don't think it's anti-church. I just think it's trying to basically weigh up the risk. And at some stage, you get to a place where within society, say, okay, that risk is bearable. When we cross the road, we run the risk of being run over. So if you drive a car, there's a risk of being killed in a car accident that might be not of your own fault. So we accept a lot of risks within society all the time. So I guess it's when it becomes an acceptable risk, and that might be changed if a vaccine becomes available. that changes things. If treatment becomes available, that changes things. If there's virtually no cases in society, then that changes things. So for instance, Ebola is a really nasty disease. You can say much worse than coronavirus. But when you get an outbreak, it's locked down quite quickly, and it's quite easy to contain it. And most of us don't go around fearful of Ebola. Well, if we could do the same with coronavirus, so if you get an outbreak, you can lock down on it quite quickly, then that would help and that would reassure. But in the places where it is an outbreak, you understand for that moment in time, there's a like a local lockdown on it, so that works.
Yeah. And as believers who, at the moment, maybe we can't do everything that we would want to do together, what's a good way of posturing yourself, I guess, through this next phase where we can't have the corporate worship experience in the same way, but you don't so you're walking this line of, you know, honoring the wisdom that is in place there, but also at the same time not feeling that your expression of your relationship to God is compromised in any way.
Yeah, I think I've been processing this a lot in the last sort of, well, not even 24 hours yet, is it? So early thoughts. But I think the fact of gathering together and people seeing one another physically will make a big difference to people. Still can't hug, so that's because we're quite a big hug.
That's going to hit you.
That kills me, and I can't touch. You know, we're quite a tactile church in that way. We like to be friendly and you know, greet people with a hug. So that we can't do that. So it will be a bit odd at first, but I think the relief of actually being in the same room together, and we can use technology. You know, there's plenty of worship available on YouTube and stuff like that through iPod. So you can certainly have music around without the actual singing going on, even from a worship team. And I guess you just have to help people enter into that experience in a meaningful way, which isn't impossible. It's just a bit more challenging, but still looking forward to that moment in time when we can hug, when we can actually raise our voices together. I think pray towards it. So for me, it's probably the most important thing we can do as Christians is take authority over this virus,
yeah,
rather than be victims to it. So you know, how much authority do we have on earth?
Yeah,
and I would say let's cast out this evil. You know, let's get, you know, deliver us from this evil one. Well, let's actually get on top of that and say, you know what, we're not having this, and not just so it doesn't exist within our church building, but it doesn't exist within society. I'd love to see it eradicated. And it may be that's through a vaccine. Well, wonderful. That would be heaven in healthcare.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think there is a bit of a sense of kind of almost like you can feel like we're just being pushed around by this thing, isn't there? And I think like you're right. Like I think one of the ways that the church can find its voice is in prayer right now, and actually just something rising up in us that just says, you know what? No, we're not having this anymore.
Yeah.
One of the things that, you know, when I've talked to friends people I know who are medical professionals and from who are Christians and stuff, is as the lockdown has been gradually eased up to this point, they've noticed sometimes different behaviors that are concerning them from the public, where initially we felt like, oh, everybody's observing it brilliantly. Wow, woohoo, high fives. Then it's not so much. And almost sometimes some different, not necessarily honoring experiences that they have with patients and things like that, because it's almost a sense of people now feeling irritated by restrictions a little bit. And I don't, do you want to talk into that a little bit? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, it's just something I was actually thinking about in the last couple of days. I think I'm noticing irritability in people. I think, wow. And probably even myself, you know, although a bit less self-aware of that probably than other people around me might be. But some people, I think, who are usually so level, so calm, so, you know, almost unruffable, kind of goes, you're obviously a little bit irritable at the moment. And I think it has got under everybody's skin, and I think they're ready for freedom, so to speak. And so I think that's really true. And I think we have to be careful, don't we, to not allow that to spill over. I think going back, one of the big spiritual principles we have at Eastgate and in Heaven and Healthcare is God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but love, power, and a sound mind. And I think it's really important we resist the temptation towards fear. And I think irritability is a kind of, I don't know, it's mixed up in there somewhere. It's generally not a good thing. So how do we overcome it? Well, with love, power, and the sound mind. God's got a source for us that enables us. I think what I think is really important is that Christians don't regard themselves as victims of this. No, he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. So actually we have a greater power, and that is true of us internally. So we don't need to live irritable. We have reason to say irritability can be understood, but actually we don't have to succumb to that. We've got resources to go overcome that. And then the sound mind thing is let's find the wisdom that actually enables us to to work this stuff out. You know, if you think back to the Second World War, my parents, grew up during the Second World War. People accepted limitations on life because there was a common enemy to beat. And I think that's how I regard this. We've got a common enemy to beat, but, you know, and I think as Christians, we could be the tipping point of the answer for beating that enemy.
Yeah, that's good. I think the love and power thing is so key, isn't it? I think because I remember a few weeks ago that Levi, my middle child, one of my boys, we were out for a walk, and this is like a little bit more into lockdown, and we were observing the 2 meter thing, and our kids are really conscious of it. They're generally really quite good, and he was aware of another family getting a bit close to us, kind of thing. And I said well done to him, because he kind of moved to account for that. And I said, Levi, I just want you to know that I don't want you to feel at all afraid, because we're not doing this because mummy and daddy are at all worried about you. You are covered by Psalm 91 protection. We are doing this for other people. This is actually an expression of love. This is a way that we can care and show that people around us who are vulnerable that we care for them. And he was like, oh, and it's almost like something lifted off him. And he actually almost felt like, actually, this is something that I can now take part in to help people. It's just something that I can do for others when there isn't that much else you can do. And I think something that if your motivation, your internal motivation is just more fear motivated in terms of self-preservation, I think there's probably a natural, you might know more about this from your medical background, but there's probably a natural life cycle where, we start off very fearful. Then you get to a point where you realize, oh, I'm actually okay. Maybe it's not so that bad after all. And then you start to get a bit bored. And then you start to think, oh, do you know what? This is just annoying me now. And I think that, when everyone's sort of poured out on the beaches en masse, I think there was a lot of people who were in vulnerable situations whose hearts sank a little bit at that point, because they suddenly felt, oh, I don't feel protected by you anymore.
I think that's very true. So, yeah, I really like what you're saying about that. We don't do this because we're fearful. So I'm not social distancing because I'm afraid. I'm doing it because it's the wise thing to do for the collective benefit, and well, which includes me. I don't think I've had coronavirus. I've not been tested. You've had it in your family, and it's not a fun experience, is it? Your wife had a nasty time with it, so it's not something to think, it's only a little thing. It's a pretty nasty thing. So, do I want to get it? Not really. So, am I protecting myself? Yes. But more than that, I'm protecting the greater realms of society. And I think that's like with Escape, when we open it, we'll be bearing that in mind. And I think you remember right from the first word when we started to talk about coronavirus, we said this: we won't have a fearful response to this. So actually, around Escape, all the posters are do this, but remember, we're not fearful. And I think that's a massive message. And as we're coming out of more of the lockdown, then that's a really important message that people, Christians, don't give in to the fear factor, but also they love society. So putting those two together are really important.
Yeah. And actually, on that note, with the fear thing, one of the things that, because I've got young children, one of the things that's on my mind is, within our home, we're very conscious of the culture that we have, and that through this situation, where we see that culture maybe starting to change, we try and address it, because we're like, no, this culture in this place is not gonna change. This is a good news culture. This is where we focus on heaven. We're heaven first. That's the culture we have here. But just thinking in our society and the younger generations coming up, and the language that's become part of our normal language now, in terms of like social distancing, or whether it's just language around, which much more prominent around risk of infection and things like not hugging people and things. Do you think there's a danger that as these generations grow up, that there's potentially a bit of an anxiety pandemic on the horizon around fear of ill health and all those kind of things that actually we're going to have to deal with in time to come?
Yeah, in all honesty, that's a concern that I do have, quite a big concern, that we're teaching our children to be frightened of viruses, and broadly speaking, most viruses are self-limiting. Even the coronavirus for most people is, but it's. And I was just reading an article in the newspaper today actually about somebody who's overcome HIV. He says, when he got his HIV diagnosis, he thought it was a killer, but actually it's not. You can live with it. So I think we've got a problem of fear, and I think people were in one sense rightly afraid of this, but actually we've got a problem with that. And I've been saying to people, we don't make our children safe by making them fearful. Now that's a really important thing, because in terms of teenagers, the number one cause of mortality in teenagers is suicide. And so if we create fearful teenagers, then they're going to be far more vulnerable, and probably we're going to increase their mortality much more than if they got coronavirus. Because very few young people, and extremely few, we'd have to say, the few that do make the headlines. The 12-year-old died, the 13-day-old baby that died. They're realities, but they're very, very few. But there'll be far more teenagers at risk of suicide if we give in to a fearful society. So even the health equation is actually skewed by that. So, and the other side of things is obviously it's the older generation who are at greater risk from the coronavirus. Now we want to protect them, but how much do we protect them at the cost to the younger generation and as they grow up? So, for instance, if they thought it was another lockdown, how much more schooling are we willing for our children to miss out on? So these are very complex things, but what I'm saying is the health equation is not just one factor. It's very, very, very multiple factors.
What advice would you give to parents who are, right now going through this in terms of with their kids, and how do we kind of balance, on having teaching your kids to follow medical guidance and wisdom through a time like this, but ensuring that they don't have this kind of legacy from this of kind of fear and anxiety?
Yeah. Well, I think what you've just said is a beautiful example. You explain to your children. I've got grandchildren, similar ages to some of your kids. So Zoe's 9, Zoe's 9, Sam is 7. We interact with them. David and my son and Joe, my daughter-in-law, do an excellent job parenting them. And they're very aware of this. They talk about their mental and their physical well-being now. We're also talking about spiritual well-being, because that's a part of the holistic care. And that's one of the things that's challenged by not being able to be in corporate worship. I think that's really important. And can we get our kids back in to Eastgate? So, but if we neglect their spirituality, then we're not actually giving proper holistic care. So that's a societal thing that we have to be able to get back to societies being open to the spiritual thing. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and I think parents can teach their kids, the goodness of God, the power of God, the faithfulness of God. We're doing resources like now at Eastgate that now we've got our children's work led by Steph producing some absolutely outstanding material. And even last night, we were saying we wanted to supplement that to just help parents with their kids' spirituality. Because again, if they know they've got a God who loves them and they haven't got a spirit of fear, but love, power and a sound mind, then they won't give in to fear, but they will understand wisdom.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. There's never been a more important time to refuse to change the subject, has there? About how good he is and how faithful he is. And
no, it's a challenging time. I think it is challenging time to keep believing in the goodness of God when you think, this is going on a long time, And I say, without going into details, we've had personal challenges with ill health within our family that hasn't gone away, and is continuing. So you think, this is, and there's something in the modern culture is not good at the waiting game. I know I've talked about this before. But the Bible talks about endurance and perseverance, and it talks about perseverance must do its work so that we become mature. And there is a sense of persevering through this. And I think that's one thing teaching your kids is perseverance at the moment. That's because they're brought up in a very, very instant culture, a throwaway culture. So the value of endurance and perseverance as part of human makeup is actually really important, isn't it? And so through this time, I think people can learn some things that will hold them in really good stead for the future. So if we give away, if we resist fear, but embrace the reality of some things you have to persevere through, then I think that would be healthy.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of, I think, a quote I saw the other day where it says, sometimes faith looks like waiting.
Yeah.
Because often, you know, we sometimes equate faith with, I believe, and so I'm releasing this into the moment right now, and I believe 100% is happening right now. But then there's faith, well, I'm still going to maintain that position, but right around me, I don't see anything changing. So real faith is I'm just choosing to remain unmoved from that situation while this is all going on around me. I had loads more I wanted to talk to you about. I thought we were going to go and maybe end up down a rabbit trail of talking about habitation and visitation as well. There's
we could do
loads to go through, but
so that song, a beautiful song, is, I think, it's a song at the moment, the Waymaker, you know, miracle worker. It says, even when I can't see it, you're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working. I've been using that a lot because sometimes I think, I'm not feeling it at the moment. I'm not feeling it, but I don't live my Christianity just on what I can feel and see. And I just did a blog post for Heaven in Healthcare last week. Should have gone out last week, which was about the unseen. You know, trusting the unseen. So if people want to go that, then I think that'll be up on the Heaven in Healthcare website soon, and it's on our mailing list. So if you actually, one of the best ways to do is just go to the Heaven in Healthcare website and sign up to become a member. It just takes an email address and a password. And you know, it's now free membership now, and donations if you want, but we're doing stuff about that. So that idea that we trust the unseen, we do all the time, and I did a blog post about that last week.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, this has been great. I'd like to continue this conversation sometime.
Do it again.
But thanks, Pete, for chatting with me today.
Next week, I think we're going to have, we're hoping to have a fellow doctor of mine, Liz Lunt, on about something very special. That'll be good as well, won't it?
Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.